1024. What does the phrase Global Britain mean to you? It's something that the government wants to pursue as a post-Brexit strategy. But one survey released today suggests that the public don't really know what it means. Live to Sophia, Gaston, the director of the British Foreign Policy Group, who led the research. Morning, Sophia.
Morning.
So talk us through what you found in this survey. First of all, I guess on the question of Global Britain and what on earth it means.
Yes, well, it's an enormous story, enormous survey, I should say. So there's clearly quite a few stories in there, but I think overall the report paints a pretty mixed picture. If we look at its findings from an optimistic slant, we can see there's a clear appetite for a pretty active foreign policy, with Britain leading on certain areas, working closely with others. But this consensus is also masking really deep levels of polarization between different social and political groups. So I think in this respect, studying public opinion on foreign policy actually tells us a lot about our domestic social landscape. And it's one that's increasingly split on a vision not only for our role in the world, but our identity, who we are, our strengths, our allies, and our strategic rivals. And as you rightly note, there's also just huge gaps in knowledge and understanding and engagement with our foreign policy. And there's a huge ambiguity about what Global Britain actually means. So I think there's clearly going to be a big task ahead when the government publishes its integrated review to bring people together and bring people along with its vision for the Global Britain project. And this is a very important task because the more united we are on our mission at home, I think, the stronger and more powerful our voice is going to be on the world stage.
Are you clear what Global Britain means? And if so, could you explain it?
Well, I think we're waiting for the integrated review. This is a huge review that the government's been doing of not only our foreign policy, but our security and defence and development policy. And that's all to be published imminently. And this is supposed to be putting the meat on the bones of what Global Britain actually means and setting out where the priority areas are going to be. That said, I think not least of all because of the domestic financial situation, I'm anticipating that the review will be more of a kind of vision, a statement of principles and priorities rather than a set roadmap of how we're going to get there. And so actually a lot of the kind of bread and butter of what Global Britain means will still be needing to be fought out and fleshed out over the coming years. But I think, we have had some early signals from the government about what they're keen for. And it is a pretty active and interventionist foreign policy to some degree. And I think, there were obviously a lot of concerns about, here and abroad about what direction Britain was going to go in after Brexit. And I think the government's been quite clear to say, this is not us turning inwards. We want to be not just global players, but global leaders.
Well, if you listening know what Global Britain is or should be, 87222, do text us, don't mess with the word Times. Sophia, what else did you find in your research that interested you?
Well, there's a huge amount of movement in public opinion, and I think that's partly to do with the pandemic, but it's also just that we've been seeing a lot of volatility since the EU referendum. And I think foreign policy isn't something that everybody necessarily gets out of bed and, makes a cup of tea and thinks about our, strategic choices in the world. But I do think that it is really important to the sense of community, belonging and security that people carry with them in a kind of implicit way every day of their lives. So I think what's been really interesting is that Brexit has compelled us to be more interested in the world around us, to be more perceptive of what's going on. It's a pretty tough landscape out there. And so people are forming opinions in real time. And even just in the past year, we can see the number of people saying they're uncertain about things is falling really dramatically. People are taking a line, taking a position, which is interesting. But at the same time, some of those positions are rather polarized from one another.
And one of those, which the Times pulled out of their headline in the coverage of this, is a rise of anti-China feeling. Many Britons considering the country a critical threat.
Yes. So the two countries that are sort of really in a period of dynamism at the moment is the United States, which we can see is experiencing a Biden bounce. It's coming back from the real historical lows that it experienced under Donald Trump. People are more willing to put their trust in America now and its moral mission. But China is the other big story. Now, we did see a further hardening of public opinion during the pandemic. And actually, in the sort of first wave of the pandemic, we actually reached a real bottom floor, I think, in negative public opinion towards China. It's evened out a little bit since then, but it's still very, very hostile. And importantly, the number of people who think that China is a critical threat has been increasing quite significantly. It's also true that if we look at a lot of the forms of engagement that the government does pursue with China at the moment, I mean, we have Chinese students in our universities, research collaboration. We want to work with them on climate change. We, of course, have big economic ties with China as well. And there just isn't a public appetite for that anymore. And so I think there's going to be a really difficult challenge for the government on the other side of this to say, okay, yes, we rightly needed to take action to, plug the holes of our vulnerability and make sure that we're secure and are serious and frank about the threats that China poses. But equally, if the government wants to, be pursuing any kind of form of engagement, they're going to need to go back to the British people and say this is why it's important. That's going to be a pretty uphill battle.
Thank you very much for your time this morning, Sophia.